All right, jumps right in. Hey, everybody. Dr. Brian and Heather here for our weekly podcast with y'all. We are excited to be here. This, by the way, is a recording. We're recording on a Wednesday just because our schedules are quite compacted tomorrow, and it's always nerve-wracking. I don't want to be late to this, and I don't want to be late to my patients. And so just for time constraints, I asked Heather to join me today, and so that's what we're doing. So I say that all to say, hey, if you jump on and there's something that we talk about or discuss, you're like, I wish they would have talked more about it. Or, Brian wasn't very clear about something. That's very typical. That's what my wife tells me. Not very clear about something. Make sure you comment. We are both happy to respond to any questions, to help in any way we can. Again, this is all about you. So this isn't live today, but we're more than happy to respond to any questions. And as always, please share this with anybody that you think it may help. So we've been talking about ADHD over the past 2 weeks. And this week, though, is Respiratory Awareness Month, okay? And so I thought let's talk a little bit about that. Growing up, I had asthma, real severe asthma. Went to the hospital. I still remember hospital visits. I still remember even just kind of the vice on the chest, where you couldn't get enough air. So this has a lot of meaning to me, but also chiropractic is what helped me kind of work through that. So I love that all. But I was talking to some students, and I was talking about, when people don't get better sometimes, and I mentioned oxygen is one of the reasons, they have really low oxygen. They snore. I got kids that snore. Sometimes that's why they don't get better. Their brains aren't getting enough oxygen. That's very tied to the respiratory system. So let's jump in on this. There's so many different avenues that Heather and I could take in this, but let's talk a little bit about the autonomic nervous system, so the fight or flight system and the respiratory system. Let's start there. And, Heather, I see a lot of kids that are stuck in fight or flight, and we see that their respiratory rate, matches that state. And so as far as brain balance and everything you do with kiddos, is that something that you all are looking at, or what are your concerns when you see a kid come in and maybe you suspect they're not getting enough airway? Maybe they're mouth breather, maybe they snore. What are things that you as a healthcare provider are looking at and pursuing?
Well, our assessment looks at over 900 functions. So we are looking at the communication between the various areas of the brain, left to right, front to back. We're also looking at the body-brain communication. And just to really highlight how important respiration is for cognitive function, our brain uses approximately 20% of the oxygen we take in, and yet it takes up about 2% of our body's weight. So our brain uses about 3 times more oxygen than our muscles do. I mean, that's how related these things are. And so when you think about, we have conscious and subconscious thought processes. A lot of our kids are impulsive and living in the subconscious. Sometimes we don't realize that breathing is one of the few bodily processes that we have the most control over. Usually it is involuntary. We breathe without thinking about it, but this is something that we can take under our control and be intentional about. It requires body awareness to do that. It requires being able to hit the brake pedal and be mindful and do that, but it can also increase mindfulness. So we're looking at the primitive reflexes, the sensory motor system, the body-brain communication, as well as communication within the brain. And we have a lot of kids who come in, we're looking at the sympathetic, parasympathetic responses. Are their hands moist and clammy? What about their heart rate? Can they regulate their body temperature? Those are signs that their fight or flight system are off, and that does impact respiration.
So first of all, I just want to say, when Heather and I do these, we agree on a topic and we jump in. And Heather's, giving you, percentage of oxygen. So that just talks to how much she knows and cares about all the families that come in, because she knows this stuff. Like this is just off the top of her head, right? So there's not a whole lot of pre-planning in this, but as far as we're not researching, she just knows this stuff. So she knows the material, she knows the neurology and the physiology. And, when you're looking at all this, I love that she mentioned that, because, so often symptoms are kind of what bring people in, right? And so you look at a symptom and, I've seen symptoms and there's just absolutely, like, I don't understand the connection, like just my understanding of physiology and all this stuff. Like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What is happening, right? Like, you. That's why we have these nice exams that weed out things and tell us stuff and give us objective findings. But respiration and heart rate and oxygen levels are a really important one, and I think are often not investigated thoroughly enough, right? And so, because I get lots of kids that come in and they don't use the word brain fog, but that's one of them, right? It's common in adults, they'll say brain fog. Inattention is a big one, and these are kids too that I find that they will be very attentive on very, very specific things, right? Again, things that they love. But outside of that, they fatigue very easily, right? And even doing things they love, they fatigue easily. Like, I don't understand this. And oxygen is kind of one of the big ones. And I do it bilaterally. Okay, so I check both sides to make sure that they're. And believe it or not, I've had parents' eyes kind of bug out of their head, and you'd be like, "Why is one side 100 and the other side 97?" So then we got to go into that. But oxygen plays such an important role in just our growth, our focus, our attention, and our ability to function in the world. And I love one of the things, or I love what Heather said about we have control over breathing. We can control it. We can control the rate, the depth. All of my kids tend to breathe up here in their chest, right? And then they get a lot of respiratory infections. But also I love, I'm a big Wim Hof fan. He is involved with breathing, or the box breathing method. Let's kind of jump into that a little bit, Heather. Do you have recommendations? Do you give them recommendations? Do you refer them out for this stuff? Or how do you work with this as far as like helping the families or the kiddo work with their breath? Do you do it in office, or what do you do there?
We're doing a lot of things to help with stress and anxiety management, emotional regulation. Growing body awareness can help them do diaphragmatic breathing. You can tell them breathe from their stomach. They have to really be in touch with their body and be able to feel that they're doing the shallow breathing up here. If their shoulders are moving, that's the shallow breathing. We need it from the abdomen. And there are things you can do where you have them put their hand on their stomach and they can watch their stomach expand when they breathe in, and then their hand goes in as they breathe out, so that they get that gives them a tactile stimuli to kind of connect that for them. Sometimes for little ones, it's good to have them as they blow out, like have them blowing up a balloon, make it something fun, or a toy that makes a cool noise when they're breathing properly. There's a lot of creative ways you can do it that we talk about with families. We look at core strength. When you engage your core, we have 200 million neurons that fire off, that get the neurotransmitters going, and that send oxygen and blood flow and glucose and all the nutrients your brain needs for growth and development. When Harvard did that study on us, and they did functional MRIs on the brains, they saw the new neural pathways we create, not just between the left and the right hemisphere, but between like the cerebellum and prefrontal cortex, like front to back regions of the brain, that get that oxygen flow so that they are getting the nutrients they need. We work on brachiation, which really expands the lung capacity. We're working on fine motor and other things at the same time bilaterally, but we're doing lots of things to really increase lung capacity. But yeah, if a student comes in and they are snoring in their sleep, I'm going to tell them that's not normal. We need to go to someone who specializes in sleep disordered breathing. Mm-hmm. And I had a really great question on our video the other day about what do you do if someone is sleeping with their mouth open. And one of the things I want to tell you that really is so counterintuitive, but sort of, until you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. There is so much research showing that the connection between our breathing and emotions is, we regulate it much less when we breathe out through when we're mouth breathers. The olfactory bulb, our sense of smell, which we do address in the center, is in the limbic brain. It is in the emotional brain. That is why you might smell a certain cookie and you think, grandma, memory creation, emotional connection. And so when we are breathing in through our nose, we are doing more to regulate our emotions than we are when we're mouth breathers. That is significant.
Huge.
Yeah. And one other thing, like you were talking about the attention, we know that mental clutter and attention, memory, all those things can be impacted, sensory processing, stress, anxiety. But it also matters, like if you look up intentional breathing, deliberate breathing, or meditative breathing, and that has to do with doing the deep breathing that Brian was talking about, but breathing in through your nose for a certain count and then holding it for a second and then breathing out. And usually the out is slower, because when we're breathing out, we are kicking in our parasympathetic response. That is the rest and digest side of the coin of going into that anxiety, fight or flight response. So you're kicking in the parasympathetic. If kids are excited about what they're doing, y'all heard us talk before about how dopamine is released, all these feel good, almost like I'm so in love chemicals that are reward centers that keep you going. But sometimes when you're doing some of those things, they are naturally doing more rapid breathing and they have more inhalations. And so they are going to be more heightened and more alert. There's a time we want to be heightened. But if we're talking about stress, and then that increases focus. But then when we're talking about anxiety response and trying to deal with stress and focus and calm, by really being intentional about breathing out, you are getting focus and calm going in a different way. Acetylcholine is released. That really helps with that focus and calm. And it's even been found by really focusing on the exhalation. Some patients in research who have been not responsive to depression medications have had a significant relief from depressive symptoms from doing intentional breathing.
Yes. So much there to unpack. Well, I'm going to touch on some points that you made me think about. One of my favorite books by James Nestor is called is it Breath? I think Breath or Breathe. I can't remember. Sorry. It's yellow, James Nestor. But I love that Heather talks about the long exhale. And so in that book, he just talks about how we actually do want a little bit of a carbon dioxide buildup. Not a lot, obviously, people, but what that does, it helps calm the system. It actually promotes the rest digest system. So if you've ever seen somebody who's, in all of the movies, they're all, this time of year, the Halloween movies, there you go. They're all breathing heavy. They're all breathing through their mouth, hyperventilating. And you think, I want oxygen. Oxygen's ultimately, I need to get all the oxygen. Well, when you breathe through your mouth, your brain thinks bear, thinks tiger, thinks danger. Okay, it doesn't think I need to focus in on the material in front of me. It thinks all this other stuff. And so, you have to think about how that's impacting you. You're in class and your mouth breathing, that's going to impact your attention, your focus. It's going to actually impact a lot of things. And one of the most common things that we see with mouth breathers, they tend to be upper chest breathers, right? Because they're trying to get quick breaths in. Actually, and so they're not using their diaphragm, like Heather was talking about. They're not belly breathing. And I love that Heather talked about touching the belly. I'll tap them on the belly a little bit, give them a little sensory, say, this is where we need to breathe, And my 13, 14-year-olds are like, why are you touching my stomach? I'm like, this is where you need to breathe, okay, right here. And but also when you breathe through your diaphragm, it actually helps regulate and correlate or connect the pelvic muscles, okay? And so, that plays a big role in a lot of things. That plays a role in posture and tone, muscle tone, and all of these other things that are also related to stuff. And so, this is really important. But
not to mention that everything you're talking about relates to the vagus nerve. One of our cranial nerves that is going down to our gut, and you're getting that region going as well. That really helps with so many of those functions. The sympathetic, parasympathetic, the release of the acetylcholine, and so on. Yeah. Yeah.
And, anecdotally, I've seen kiddos, it'll help even with some of their, their urges that they have, right? Like, you have some kids that just have no body awareness. I need to pee. And like, it goes from like 0 to 100. Like, I'm going to pee myself right now. When you properly breathe in those muscles and that, like Heather and I always talk about that body awareness, proper breathing is tied to that. And so, the parents are like, they're giving me more warning, or we haven't had as many accidents, or we've been able to make it to the restroom, which can be a big deal, right? And so, this is all related, right? And so I love that we're talking about this, because I don't think this is a topic that's discussed enough. We always try to talk about topics that aren't discussed enough, but this is one where I think it's just, some maybe in the world, or in the health health world, there we go, that's what I'm looking for, don't look at this as a connection to some of the symptoms they're seeing, but it very much is. And so I'm just going to put this out here before I go back to having Heather give us some wonderful insight. But I am a big fan of box breathing. Kids understand it. It's pretty easy to do. All you're doing is inhaling, exhaling at the same. I tell them 6 seconds. So inhale for 6 seconds, hold for 6 seconds, exhale for 6 seconds, hold for 6 seconds. And you're starting to regulate that system. the fight or flight system, which is important for immune function, attention focus, digestion, all that stuff that we commonly talk about. So,
yeah. We talk about epigenetics from time to time when it relates to the topic we're addressing. And it's nice to know that this is something that in research has been shown to impact our gene expression. Epigenetics is the influence of environmental factors on gene expression, because our DNA is a blueprint, a waiting instruction from the environment. We've talked about a lot of things in the environment that are negatively impacting gene expression, such as a sedentary lifestyle, too much screen time, toxins in foods in the environment, additives, that kind of thing. But we can have an effect on our gene expression by doing conscious breathing. I mean, there are many research studies showing this, that it can impact how invigorated you feel, like long-term, by practicing this regularly, that it can impact insulin production.
yeah.
Right? So thinking about blood sugar and your risk of type 2 diabetes, that kind of thing. I mean, it impacts so many, it can in long-term impact your natural knee-jerk responses to stress. So it is, this is a positive difference in gene expression we can have from taking some time. So I understand why people, like, everybody's like, just breathe, and like, yeah, like, be present. Like, those things you hear them so much that you can start kind of blowing them off and like, oh yeah, yippee skippy, that, it just can sound anecdotal, but the reason you hear that all the time, this is not one of those overdone things. It's because it works. And a lot of our kids who are getting just the thoughts are swirling and the emotions are big and I can't put things into perspective. When you think about mindfulness, you're like, just be present in this moment. Everything else drops off, and just pay attention to your sensory experience. Feel the breeze on your skin. What can you smell in there? What can you see? Like, you're just noticing sights and sounds and tastes and textures just in that moment. And then when you couple that with really doing some intentional breathing, box breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, there are even some where you can close one nostril and breathe. You can alternate nostrils to stimulate different brain regions. There's a decent amount of research on that as well. You can look those up, but you can impact gene expression when you make that a habit. And it doesn't take long each day. And then it becomes a habit to breathe correctly instead of having to think about the belly versus the shoulders or the chest.
You bring up a fantastic point about epigenetics. And ultimately too, where I connect this is just mental health, right? When you can control your breathing, you can start controlling your thoughts. This is really important, especially with anxiety. I found, let's be honest, we all have moments of anxiety, right? I look at my schedule and I've just got a full day pack. I'm like, how am I going to fit this in? I breathe. I take control of the moment and I breathe. But so many kids are anxious in so many different scenarios, right? And so one of the ways I've helped just control my anxiety or my mental state is I just focus on breathing, right? We have all these thoughts, right? I gotta do this, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta do that, I gotta go on the podcast with her, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. We have all these things, right? We have them all. And if I just focus on my breathing, my world kind of shuts off a little bit and I can just breathe on that. And so, lots of people are like, I know meditation is good, but I can't meditate. I have too many thoughts. That's one of the things I tell them. Just think about your breath. Just don't do anything. Just count with your breathing. And your brain just kind of naturally starts calming down and you become more alert. I found that I get more alert. I have some people that, they kind of start coming down, but I get more alert and energized, right? I'm like, ooh, I'm empowered. So I have other, I have kids that come down. They're like, the body starts to relaxing, the muscles melt. It's a beautiful thing. But I have found that to be a great way because as a parent, as a business owner, all this stuff, we have all these demands on us. This is one of my favorite ways, aside from exercise. Those are my two favorite ways to kind of close off the outside world and focus on me for a little bit.
I'm so glad you said that because I hear the same thing. Like, my mind is going a million miles an hour. I can't make it stop. And then that feels stressful to try to, you cannot force yourself to not think. Your brain is always going to have some thought, but it's about replacing the frenetic thought with something else. When you start counting, do something as simple as counting You could name state capitals. I mean, use something. You are using your logical brain that gets you out of the fray and into something that you're being methodical about. You are really switching gears in there. So instead of trying to not think, it's about replacing the fray with something methodical. It doesn't matter what it is. But yeah, counting is a great one until you really get used to that rhythm.
Yeah, and I found, initially, when I do some breathing exercise, like I said, I do a lot. I like Wim Hof a lot, but you hold your breath for a while, and your brain starts racing because you're timing it, right, like in your brain. So I just started counting, and that really kind of just took my world from and so I love what you point out there. It's just a way you're just replacing, right? And so it's a great way of doing that. So hopefully that'll help. Parents implement it. We're stressed out all the time too. And our kids, as Heather and I always talk about, they feed off of our energy as well. So this is something y'all can do together. That's another thing I like about it. You both can sit there and focus on breathing and work on this together, and ultimately just be healthier, more present, and all of those are wonderful things. So, Heather, is there anything else you want to touch on as far as this goes? We're kind of at the 20-minute mark. So we try to keep this between 20 and 25 minutes for everybody. Everybody's busy, but anything else you want to discuss with this as far as breathing and oxygen, all that fun stuff?
This is adjacent, but just to finish up that thought where we're talking about replacing one thought with another, and you were talking about the counting is what works for you. Even aside from breathing, but also related to regulation, is that if you teach your kids that, or yourself, if you're starting to escalate, if you can use your logical brain, do math calculations, name state capitals, just anything that is just like more academic, literal, logical, concrete for 6 seconds, that is long enough for your conscious brain to take over instead of you going into that anxious fight or flight response. So many kids are missing some of the yellow warning signals that they're about to escalate, and then it just hits. This breathing is going to get that mind-body connection going, which can help develop. There are a lot of very intentional things we need to do to grow body awareness, but then they start being better at either physically or mentally body mapping and starting to recognize that their heart rate's starting to go up, or they're getting some tension in their shoulders, or they got a weird feeling in the pit of their stomach. They start connecting that's a yellow warning sign that I'm about to have a big emotion. Let me kick into that breathing, or let me tell a joke or go for a walk or do whatever it is that regulates me. So you really are growing body-brain connection, awareness, and getting them more aware of the yellow warning signal so that their emotions don't go from 0 to 60 with no warning and just hit. And then by the time they're escalated, it's much harder to bring them back down. So.
Yeah, no, I 100%. If you don't know what's going on underneath, if you're not aware of this, you go 0 to 60 like that, right? And so, that's part of what we talk about, right? It's just knowing yourself, introception, right? And there's a strong tie to introception and mental health. I mean, very close tie. And different parts of the brain that are lit up when we have introception versus not. And there's even some diagnoses that are tied to that, right? But I don't want to get into that because it's not about diagnosis. It's about bettering ourselves, being the best we can for ourselves and our family. And part of that's just being self-aware. And so I think there's a lot of pressure to be self-aware sometimes. And so I think this is one of the best ways, body movement, breathing, and those can really change momentum in somebody's life. I've seen it myself personally in my own life, but just others that I get to work with. It's very, very powerful stuff. Okay. I think there's a lot more we could talk about on this topic. But we're going to leave it at this because I think this is a good foundation. All right. Heather, everybody loves you. They always tell me, I love Heather. How do they follow you? Where do they get more information? Where do they get more Heather?
At The Hidden Churn on Instagram or Facebook, or Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, or Southlake.
Awesome. Make sure you follow those pages. She puts out great content, but she also has another podcast Mondays at 2:00. Will you be having one this week?
Actually, my cohort said we need to switch times. And so starting week after next, so there's going to be 1 week off, but then starting November the 2nd, it's going to be Tuesday mornings at 11 a.m. That will be a switch. Yeah.
All right. So they're switching. So the first week of November, the first Tuesday of November at what time?
11 a.m. Central.
11 a.m. All right, Central Time. All right, so make sure you follow those pages. Start following that podcast. She has other, previous podcasts over the past, I don't even know, year plus, right? And so go watch those. Lots of great content. If you need to get a hold of me, you can call me at 972-387-4700. As always, we will do our best to answer questions the best that we can. Please share this with the other people. I know there are kids out there struggling, and I know this is a portion of why they struggle. And how do I know this? Because about 50% of the kids I've seen over the past month and a half have had some sort of mouth breathing or, some sort of respiratory where I know they're stuck in fight or flight and they have minimal control. They have poor focus. They have immune function issues. And so this is a problem. Okay. And, with this whole thing going on, there's nothing better than a good, strong immune system during a pandemic. So, all right. We're here. If you need us, please message us if you need us, but we will be back again next Thursday. I'm excited to see you all. Is that the end of October or is that the start of November? That's the end of October.
That involves math. It's the end of October, yes.
All right. Woo! All right. We're almost into November. And then the holiday season starts, right? And so we'll have a lot going on then. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Heather, as always. And please share this with families in your neighbor or in your